There's my 5x7. That's Henry. Um, that's a picture of Henry and me. I don't know if you can see it. Been with me longer than, well, almost as long as my wife.
Do you recall how you picked up that camera?
Yeah, I was using it. That's a 5x7 Agfa Anchell. Same type of camera Anchell used. Only his was an 8x10. Of course, I got this before I knew Anchell, so he didn't copy me. Anyway, it's his name. How did you come up with the name Robert?
I like it. Now, you just flashed your darkroom cookbook. I want to learn more about that.
Well, the first edition of the darkroom cookbook was this one. It's 1994. I was writing articles for Camera and Darkroom magazine at the time on darkroom. I had a stack. I actually, it can't obvious that, but it was drawers and notebooks filled with all these formulas and tips and techniques I had picked up from other photographers that I had learned from. And, you know, what was I say, add a little bromide to do this or that. And I just had all these notes. And I thought, these guys are old timers. All of them were, I was in my 20s. They were in their 50s and 60s. They're going to die. I'm going to die. All this information, this is long before digital. We're talking the 1970s. I started collecting these. And nobody knows half this stuff. I need to share them. So I wrote the Darkroom Cookbook specifically to share those things. It ended up being a book of formulas and other things as well. So as much as possible, I tried to do that, share these old techniques with people. The Nude at Big Sur workshop was the longest running workshop, continuously running workshop on the nude. It began in 1982, I believe. 82, I taught it for UC Santa Barbara. Then I went to Big Sur and began teaching it with Edna Bullock, the widow of Win Bullock, who had become a photographer after Win died. She picked up the camera as a way to console herself for his death. And funny thing with Edna, she told me that when Win was alive, they specifically, he said to her, one photographer in the family's enough. Or, no, he didn't say that. She decided that on her own. Photographer while he was alive. When he died, she picked up one of his cameras, a 35mm. He became a very fine photographer. So she and I taught that workshop together for a number of years. Then she went off on her own, taught at UC Santa Cruz. But that workshop ran for 25 years, and there's never been a workshop on the nude continuous like that for that long, and influenced a lot of people. Many of them have had their own books out, which I have some copies of. They send them to me. One from China, one from all over the world. But that was a fine workshop. But after about 25 years, I just one day woke up and said, I cannot photograph another nude on a rock. I just can't do it. By the way, the reason I met Edna was because I was highly influenced by the nudes of Win Bullock in Big Sur. So I called Edna about 2 years after he died and asked if I could come over and meet her and see some of his work, and she was very gracious, and we became friends.
Well, that's inspiring. I think I'll try to track down a model or somebody so that I could add a nude into this collection. I think that would be interesting to be the first that I'd ever shot, and I think that would be a fascinating experience.
It's funny, nudes. You look at the nudes of Ruth Bernhard. A friend of mine, Tom Harrop, who was the editor of Camera and Darkroom magazine for many years, and got me started writing in 1989. Tom published a portfolio of Ruth Bernhard, who, of course, the great photographer from the West Coast, who was also a very close and friend of Edward Russet and Win Bullock and all the rest. He published her nudes in Camera and Darkroom back in the 1980s, and he got an angry phone call from a guy saying, how could you, I'm canceling my subscription because you published this pornographic images. He said, pornography, this is fine art. He said, it's pornography, And Tom said, well, excuse me, what do you think of the work of like Degas or Michelangelo? He said, I remember he said Michelangelo. And the guy said, Surely, Mr. Harrop, you know that Michelangelo was the pornographer of his day.
Wow.
Well, I think actually we just stated it. One man's fine art nude is another man's pornography. So what makes it any fine art and not fine art, I think, depends on the eye of the beholder. And in fact, I think all art is that way. One person can look at a photograph and just fall off their chair or just pass out and say, I had an epiphany looking at that photo of Anchell Adams. And another one could say, Anchell Adams, he's just a postcard photographer. I've had people, very fine photographers, tell me that. And yet, I must say, the first time I saw an original Anchell Adams photograph, I just stood there for almost half an hour. I couldn't tear myself away from it. I used to take my students to see Brett Weston, who, in my opinion, was one of the greatest photographers, West Coast photographers, large format, that kind of thing. We used to take them to his house, and he would show their latest work. We were filing out, and I was at the end of my students, and he's shaking everybody's hands as they were leaving. And I was at the end of the line, and the woman just in front of me said, Mr. Weston, I really enjoyed looking at your stuff. Really sincere. And he looked down at her and he said, oh, incidentally, people used to tell me, people close to Brett used to say, you sound exactly like him when you talk like him, so you can pretend this is Brett. He looked down at her and he said, he was hot tall, he said, my dear lady, I don't do stuff. A friend of mine, Martha Casanova, very fine photographer from the Carmel area. Martha, before I met her, one of my students, I was teaching a workshop, a landscape workshop, by the way, and in Big Sur, and I mentioned shooting. We're going out and do some shoot this or that. And one of my students, a woman, said, "Excuse me, Mr. Anchell, but Martha Casanova says you shouldn't use the word shoot. It's denigrating. You know, we don't shoot. That's violence." When I met her, I thought about this, which I often do, and I came to the conclusion that she was right. And I took the word shoot out of my language. Then when I met her, I told her about that. And I said, and by the way, you know you had an influence on me because I don't use that word anymore. Well, I got that from Anchell. So words have meaning. And if we shoot, especially I tell my students in nude workshops, we do not shoot models. You may photograph a model, you may take their picture, you may work with them, but you will not shoot them in my class.
Never thought of it in that way, and you know that's the thing. You don't know what you don't know, right? Until somebody mentions it, and you really think about it.
Photographers are traditionalists. I have found, even digital photographers, we are very slow to change. Once we get an idea, or we find a camera, or we find something we like, and we do it that way, we tend to not want to change. Now we will change, but it's like the Titanic turning. When I get here a new idea like this thing of Martha, I don't shoot photography, shoot pictures. It takes me a while, but I think about it, gestates, and then I come around, and if it's right, it's right. You got to admit it's right. I have 4 books. I have the Darkroom Cookbook. I've got the Variable Contrast Printing Manual, which is out of print. And I have this book I do with Bill Troop, the Film Developing Cookbook. For me, I know a lot of photochemists, but from a practical standpoint, how things work, or how in practice as opposed to theoretically, Bill is your man. He knows more about photographic chemistry and how to use it. What I just came out with last year is the digital photo assignments. And this was based on the fact that I got hired about 5 years ago to teach for Oregon State University. And I went online. I've been teaching since 1979. And I have a lot of assignments, but they're all workshops. They're a week long, 2 weeks long, maybe a week, maybe a weekend. I've never taught a 10-week course where every week I have to do. So I thought, I'll go on. So I went online. I bought something like 10 books on photo assignments. And each one was as bad as the next. One of them, I can just remember, assignment 51, go photograph a landscape. That was the assignment. Okay. So I wrote my own book. I wrote my own book on digital assignments. There are 41 assignments in there. What I did, I started the first assignment. I based it on what Carrie Callahan used to do. Carrie Callahan was a very fine and influential photographer, taught from the Rhode Island Institute of Photography. And Harry, every day for 30 years, before he would go out, and the story varies. Some say he went out in the morning, some say he went out in the evening. Every day he would go for a walk from where he lived, and he would not come home until he'd photographed something he had not seen before, he had not photographed before, or he saw it in a different way. Then he would come home. He did this for 30 years. So I have an assignment called Significant Photo based on what Harry Callahan did. That's my first assignment. I go from there to f-stop shutter speeds. And the last assignment is creating a web presence, which I call shameless promoting, and how to promote yourself and everything you have learned in this book. And so it takes you all the way even to selfies with an iPhone.
That's awesome. That's a must-have.
And it takes you there. It even has an assignment that I created years ago for my students called, I call this tribute photo, in which you take a favorite photo from an ad, or anywhere, actually, it could not be an ad, and you do a tribute. So my favorite photo of all time is Richard Avedon, Dovima with 16-wheeler, with elephants. You may know that. Get permission on Avedon's trust to reproduce it, but you go online and see Dovima with elephants, which was taken in a circus in France with an 8x10 view camera. And I made my tribute photo, which is this one, Dovima with 16-wheelers. Work I'm doing today, which is kind of what I think is cutting edge work with digital and Photoshop of jazz musicians, in which they manipulate them in Photoshop, called Jazz in Motion, with N spelled E-N.
Yeah, that's actually interesting that you mentioned the jazz, because just last night I shot a remote live over the internet shot of the Hot Jazz Festival in New York. And it turned out to be quite an interesting image. I actually have it here. I don't know if you can see that very well, but here you have a banjo player. This is very abstracted out. You know, there's a lot of distortion from the digital. The piano player here, but this is a wet plate photo I took live.
My work, Jazz in Motion, looks very similar to what you're doing there, only in color. I'm saying it's not the process. That picture, if somebody sees your wet plate photo, they'll say, wow, that is really cool what he did with that. I like that. Or they'll say, who the this guy think he is? It's one or the other. They'll look at my work and say, that's really cool what he did with digital. Or they'll say, this guy's trying too hard to impress, you know, with the digital photography. But the point is, it's what's on, you can put those side by side, two different processes, either go for it or they won't.
Back to the a question I had for you. So we've talked a little bit about people's reactions to your photography, you know, and how that can be a mixed bag. But when you're creating the image, for example, that you were working on last night, what does the inspiration for when that moment hits you? What does inspiration feel like to you?
There are two parts of photography. Actually, there's the image capture, which is photography, in my opinion, or digital imaging, and there is the we didn't call it before, it was only darkroom. Now it's post-processing. And that's where there's darkroom, or where there's Photoshop. It's post-processing. And they're two different things. When I'm out in the field with Henry or with Wilhelm here, photographing, actually Gintaro is his name. Wilhelm was my Leica. He's Japanese, that one's German.
I see.
He would not like me called Wilhelm. So with Gintaro here. So when Gintaro and I photograph, you know, I'm doing photographing jazz musicians. It's just totally instinctual. You're seeing and you're recognizing. All photography is recognizing a moment. You and I could stand right there at the foot of the stage, same camera, shoulder to shoulder, and you would release the shutter at a different time than I would. And the reason we would release the shutter at a different time is not because I'm better than you or you're better than me, because we recognize different moments. Okay? That's why no two photographers are the same. Photography is the moment of recognition. That's when you hit the table. That's when you did your jazz musician last night. So, having said that, when I'm out with Gintaro photographing, it's strictly a reaction to what I'm seeing in the street, on the stage, wherever. When I get into post-processing with a darkroom, go through Lightroom and look at my gallery, that one looks interesting to me. In fact, I have a whole bunch of them that I've created specifically for Jazz in Motion. And what I'm doing, by the way, I set my shutter speed at half a second. That's where I begin, because I want the blur there. So I look at all of them. This one looks like that will make a good one. Boom. So I've selected basically, kind of like you selected a starting point. Then I get into Photoshop, and all I do is play. I apply apps. There's no rhyme or reason to it. And what I'm looking for at that point is I'm not making a statement. I'm looking for something that looks good. I'm looking for something that's going to please people to look at, and hopefully they'll look at it and get it. What I would like to see is that people would see it and they'll get a sense of the jazz in motion, that the musicians aren't static. In fact, that is what one of the nice things about digital. Digital is creating a whole new world where photos are no longer just two-dimensional representations on a piece of paper. These little 90-second or 6-second instant pictures where they just move for 6 seconds. That's a new form of photography, in which photography is no longer just a still image. It's all new forms of image making. And I'm personally all for that. I love Henry, and I love working with Henry, but still, so I'm working with a blurred image, and then I'm trying to get that feeling across, ultimately, to the viewer of jazz in motion. Now the sound has to come out of their own head. I believe in combining art forms, and I believe everybody should have more than one form. For example, that drawing on the wall is one of my drawings. And to me, it doesn't. Could that be a photo? That could be a photograph. It could be a drawing. Either the image has meaning or it doesn't, and that's all there is to it. It doesn't matter whether I used a pencil or I used a camera. That's what's important, the finished work. So that's why I say digital film makes no never mind. The artist chooses, and if an artist prefers to work in the older form of platinum, gum, or wet plate, that's their medium.
Yes. Well, that's the thing, is this medium really caught my eye when I met Anton Orlov. He just, it was an inspirational kind of thing after he talked about it, and he explained the process. And I'm actually a painter, and that's why I come as an artist, come from that medium into wet plate. And wet plate also has this very physical interaction. You're pouring the plate. It gives you painterly effects even sometimes with some of the distortions or from the chemical process. So it's fascinating. And most of my work actually revolves around moving or merging digital and analog, or how these two realities exist, and how there's always a little fine line of distortion in there. Even in our video here, we're as close as we can be to each other without, actually being in the same room or something. I mean, we've got video and everything, but there's still this layer of distortion with the sound and with things. And so I like to capture these types of moments and just highlight them. I mean, we're living in a very interesting time now where the world is changing so quickly. We're going through the technology revolution, and I think history will look back at this time as a very exciting period, just as wet plate was when it came out, when photography first was invented, daguerreotypes and wet plate. So
I would like to mention, by the way, because you brought it up, Anton Orlov is a very inspirational teacher. He did a presentation for my students at Oregon State University. I'm retired from there now, but when I was there, he did a presentation with a bus he had, and they were very much, they had never seen any of that. And I really appreciated his doing it. I have a lot of respect for what he's doing in terms of spreading the information. Vaguely familiar with it. I taught platinum printing. I taught gum printing. I've never done wet plate.
I think what I'll do now is go ahead and prepare the plate. And what I do at this point is I dial in with my mobile phone, and so you can actually see some of the process.
By the way, in my book, The Darkroom Cookbook, when I have a chapter on building a darkroom, and I say the most important single thing in a darkroom, before you buy an enlarger or lens, you put it in
ventilation or
ventilation.
Yeah.
It's more important than anything else in a darkroom.
Okay. 3, 2, 1. So here we go.
Hey, that looks just like me in reverse.
There we go. Wow, this is an interesting image. That's great.